In the central highlands, the targets for 2 NVA divisions were the provincial capitals of Kon Tum and Pleiku. The defenders, the South Vietnamese 22nd Division, fell back in disarray, but were instantly reinforced, and they succeeded in holding the town. Meanwhile, the NVA seized control of most of Dinh province, threatening to cut the country in two.
Kon Tum falls, the Americans fear the communists may strike down and cut the country in half. Trapped inside Kon Tum, the civilian refugees never escape the sound of battle. The front line is less than a mile away. This mortar pit is being dug in a village on the outskirts of Kon Tum. The people watching are not Vietnamese, they're the Montagnards, the mountain people of Vietnam. The war taking place half a mile away is not their war, but whatever its outcome, the traditional life and culture of these tribes is certain to be one of the casualties. The Montagnards have darker skins than the Vietnamese, almost round eyes and quite different customs. Since they came to Vietnam from Polynesia long ago, they've lived in small villages of long houses, growing hill rice and hunting with wooden crossbows in the forests. The Montagnards' land covers 2/3 of South Vietnam, but the Vietnamese outnumber the million or so hill tribesmen by 17 to 1 and see them as savages. The Montagnard head man in Kon Tum is Pierre Yuk.
The situation in Kon Tum is certainly very serious. The communists are all around Kon Tum. They're on the edge of Montagnard villages such as this one here, only a mile from the center of the town. But the people want to stay here if they can.
When the communists shelled the town, the Vietnamese fled. This is the deserted center of Kon Tum, the Vietnamese area.
The Vietnamese have left Kon Tum. They have homes and relations in the lowlands. They only come to the Central Highlands to trade, to set up shop and take money from us. Their roots aren't here. They have enough money to be able to leave and relations to go to. For the Montagnards, the situation is entirely different. If we leave our land, our ancestral villages, if we go elsewhere, it's no longer our land. Without doubt, we wouldn't have enough to eat. How are we going to survive in a Vietnamese town?
Mine yards have always been a traditional Negro of South Vietnam, and especially in the highlands here. They've always not exactly been slaves, but just not too far above it. The mine yards are simple people. I mean, they're satisfied with a little bit of land and their family. I mean, there's just not much else to it. They like to be left alone mainly, which they haven't been.
These people have lived through the wars of Indochina, which began almost 30 years ago. The Montagnards continue to work their land, despite the fighting only a few fields away. But some Montagnards have been given a special role in the defense of Kon Tum. Their job is to help the Americans hold isolated fortresses close to the Ho Chi Minh trails. American advisors took us 40 miles behind communist lines to a Montagnard camp at Ben Het. Flying at 10,000 feet above the range of enemy guns, the destruction left behind by the B-52 bombers can still be seen. These traditional Montagnard lands are now free fire zones. Any tribesmen who've not retreated to the special camps or to Kon Tum run the same risks as the communists. Ben Het is only 7 miles from the communists' underground complex on the Ho Chi Minh trails, which the Americans call Base 609. The camp commands the main road from the communist base to Kon Tum. Ben Het has been under daily rocket fire for 3 months, but the Montagnards are stubborn fighters. This is why they were recruited by the Green Berets who first established Ben Het. This camp is now so dangerous that the helicopters will stay on the ground for only 30 seconds. The Montagnard soldiers at Ben Het live in the trenches and bunkers with their women and children. These tribal families didn't even leave when the battle for Ben Het was at its most intense.
We've taken probably a little over 1,500 incoming rounds in about a 3 to 4 week period. Now that doesn't count what we took during the battle. It's virtually impossible to estimate what they threw in here during that battle. Probably around 2,000 rounds of heavy stuff. What they threw at us as far as small arms is concerned, you can't count it.
A special relationship has existed between the Montagnards and the Americans since the beginning of the war. The Green Berets admired the Montagnards' courage and their qualities as guerrilla fighters, which they contrasted with those of the South Vietnamese.
The Special Forces camps have started around 1962, 63. To tell you how long this individual family lived here would be almost impossible unless we asked them. This is where they live, this is where they fight from, other than the women move back to the inner perimeter if there is an attack on the camp. But you'll find some of these people have been here since 63.
Why do they come in from the villages?
Well, we recruit and ask them to join the Vietnamese army. They do, and they bring their families with them. Now you'll find that the Montagnards in this area, or in this camp, are all from this general area. And this is the key to a Ranger border camp, or the old Special Forces border camp, and that is you keep your people in the area where you recruit from. If you take them away longer than a couple of months period, they'll go back to the village.
The Montagnards' fight at Ben Het is vital to the defense of Kon Tum. The camp lies astride the most direct tank route to the city. Its strategic importance was underlined by the intensity of the communist assault.
At this point, you can see that this is where the main attack is. Back here, you were massed, but you can see one of the tanks down here that actually came in and proceeded to drive the Vietnamese, the friendly Vietnamese, out of the bunker line.
This is the Soviet-built PT-76 tank that very nearly broke into our perimeter. Had this thing got inside of the perimeter, there's no telling the amount of damage this thing would have done before we finally got it knocked out.
Now, this is the sector that took the main attack, which is from the east. And about 4 bunkers on each side of this, or 3 on each side of it, is where the NVA got through the wire and into the bunkers. And of course, the counterattack from my rear then had to retake these 4 bunkers. This one happened to cave in from the use of logs, as Bob told you earlier, and then they rolled a barrel of gasoline in and set it on fire. You can see it's still smoking over here to my left.
How many bodies are underneath there?
We estimate about 40.
And what do you do with all these dead NVA bodies when you get them? I mean, you had a lot.
We burn them. It's the only way. We couldn't possibly bury as many as we got.
The Americans say 1,500 communists have been killed in the battle at Ben Het. Montagnard losses are 110 dead. There are no casualty figures for the women and children.
You're in a typical bunker line where the defense is actually fought for a Ranger border camp. This one is typical of the other 11 camps that I advise and supervise. You'll find here to my left a 30 caliber machine gun, which of course the United States Army no longer uses. This is where the fighting's done. To my right, you'll find living quarters, where the people live during the day, during the night, until, as we said earlier, the fighting begins. At that time, the women then move back to the rear, to the inner perimeter, and the men stay in these positions and fight.
This woman has lived here for 7 years. Her 2 children were born in this bunker. They've never been outside the camp.
The mountain yard is a very primitive type of person. They don't really understand modern technology. Special forces trained them in modern weapons and gave them the weapons that they use. They paid them the first time the mountain yards had ever seen money. They didn't know what money could even do. They gave them clothing, which the mountain yards had never had before. They were like fathers to them. And over the years, as they led them into combat situations, the mountain yard began to trust the American far more than he'll ever trust a Vietnamese.
As the Americans withdraw, the Montagnards are left increasingly vulnerable to the hostility of the South Vietnamese and the onslaught of the communist advance. After 2 hours, we were flown out of Ben Het, leaving behind this isolated fortress, the home for nearly 2,000 Montagnards. All the countryside between Ben Het and Kon Tum fell to the communists 6 weeks ago. Some of the Montagnards stayed in their villages, but others fled from the fighting and the bombing to Kon Tum. Last week, there were still some 20,000 Montagnards trapped in the town, and no effective airlift organized to get them out. The dangers that face the refugees are emphasized by the fact that supplies of rice are only flown in on a daily basis in case the town should fall to the communists. One of the 10 remaining American advisors described how the Vietnamese escaped from the city.
The first people who left Kon Tum were the refugees from the northern part of Kon Tum province, and the majority of them were Vietnamese. They did give a very few Montagnards out to start with.
Why was that?
The province chief ordered mainly Vietnamese first and Montagnards second.
These Vietnamese got out when the communist attack began 6 weeks ago. 20,000 Vietnamese escaped in the first few days, but in the 4 weeks since, only 8,000 Montagnards have been airlifted out. Among those left are Bing and his wife Lai, who've been waiting to get out for 3 weeks now. They have 2 children and Lai is 6 months pregnant. To get to Kon Tum and escape the fighting and bombing in the countryside, Bing and Lai walked 50 miles from their village.
Over 200 of us had to leave our village, Dak Sut, one night. The fighting was very close. We ran out into the forest. We left behind our pigs and chickens. All we could carry was cooking pots and blankets. There was no room for our clothes. We couldn't carry rice. It was too heavy. Yes, we were very scared of the American planes. We heard them drop their bombs. Sometimes they were very close to us. The earth shook, and we saw the smoke rising above the trees. Sometimes they were far away. Then there was a strange rumble.
The only way for Bing and the other refugees to escape from Kon Tum is by air. But for weeks the airstrip has been under rocket attack, and war supplies and food have taken priority over people. The Montagnards wait patiently for a lift out on the incoming rice and ammunition helicopters, but they often wait for a long time, for the helicopters are flown by their old masters, the Vietnamese. Bing and Lai have been trapped in Kon Tum for 3 weeks, but now they're near the head of the queue.
At first we felt safe in Kon Tum. We were very happy to arrive. But now all we want to do is escape. We've been told that we'll have to wait our turn for a helicopter. There's no other way out for us. We sit listening to the bombs and rockets. We're afraid. We feel we may die at any time.
These Montagnard babies from the Catholic orphanage are waiting to get out, but the Vietnamese helicopter drops its load of rice and flies off empty. The American advisor gave us a simple explanation for the bottleneck at the evacuation point: extensive corruption among the South Vietnamese air crews.
The Vietnamese Air Force land just over there, their helicopters. Do they pick up these refugees?
Negative. They do not.
Why not?
They will not pick up the Montagnards for reasons I stated earlier, that they don't particularly care for the Montagnards to start with. That and the fact that they usually get anywhere from about 10,000 piastres a head for refugees that they carry out. There was some of this going on. Money's been seen changing hands several times. The main reason they won't take people out over there is because they're more interested in making money on what they do take out. The Vietnamese Air Force people come down here and buy Hondas at rock bottom price because they cannot be gotten out of the city.
While we filmed, Vietnamese soldiers pushed looted Honda motorcycles onto an empty helicopter. The Hondas are taken to be sold in the town of Pleiku. The Montagnards are left in Kon Tum. We asked the American advisor why this happened.
Well, it's typical. I mean, it's typical of the Vietnamese way of thinking. They put more value on money than they do of life. I get pretty angry sometimes about, especially when you see a Vietnamese soldier dressed up as a woman trying to get on a helicopter. You kind of want to take a stick to his head.
The irony of the situation in Kon Tum is that it's the Montagnards displaying the fighting qualities the Americans admire who stiffen the defense lines weakened by Vietnamese desertion and hold the city for the government in Saigon.
I think they're fighting somebody else's war because they're not, then like I say again, they're not going to get anything out of it after it's over with. They'll go back to their villages and hamlets and continue to be the bottom man on the pole. The Montagnards in general will stand and fight. The Vietnamese are in general the opposite. Unless they're so far superior, they don't like to stay.
But the North Vietnamese are now so close that American planes are bombing only a few hundred yards outside the town. Meanwhile, the refugees at the evacuation point flee as an ammunition plane is hit by a rocket. Bing and his wife Lai retreat from the shrapnel. No one will be airlifted out on this day, so Bing and his family return to their camp. Life in the refugee camp is not easy. Water is scarce, and the family take what they can from a passing army truck.
Last night we were very scared. A rocket exploded across the road. We all went and lay down in the trenches. The VC attacked with 6 tanks. We were awake all night listening and waiting. The children cried and yelled. We do not know what will happen to us. We do not understand this war. We just want to live in peace. We want to return to our village.
While the air attacks continued overhead, the refugees returned next day to the evacuation point. Bing and his wife Lai were out of luck again. They watched the bodies of soldiers killed at the perimeter being brought to the evacuation point. That day, the evacuation of the dead took precedence over the living.
Fought with 3 American units in Vietnam. This is my first time fighting with ARVN. And the individual is a hard fighter. Very hard fighter, and I'm proud to serve with him. very hard mortar barrage, maybe 500 rounds or more, and then a tank attack, and infantry and sappers tried to break the bridge. And it was a very intense fire, and soldiers of our regiment that we advised, the 44th Infantry Regiment, knocked out these two tanks, both of them within, very close to the front lines, one of them within about 100 meters of the command post. They knocked them out with the M72. Both of these were killed by soldiers of the regiment. They're both T-59, which is the Chinese version of the Russian 4 tank. Yeah, right there, he didn't quite get it there. About 5 feet in front of you is the perimeter. About 5 feet in front of you is the perimeter. There's a small M72 weapon at about 25 feet away from his bunker position. The attack was under rounds of mortar. Don't forget it's the 44th Infantry Regiment that did it. The individual ARVN soldier right along here in these holes fought very hard. They were very brave. It's these men right along here that held the line. They didn't break and run when the tanks came like some ARVN units had done. The soldiers in this regiment stood and fought and knocked out the tanks. Rather than run, they stood and killed the tanks. All they fight with is grenades. All the soldiers are carrying grenades because the enemy is so close. Deputy Senior Advisor, 44th ARVN Regiment, 23rd ARVN Division, here at Kon Tum.